A while back, I was looking at the comments section for one of my Grand Theft Auto videos when somebody made a remark about Claude from GTA 3 being able to tame Catalina for a number of years. I disputed that because I believed that it wasn't Catalina being tamed, more so that it was Claude himself being just as crazy, but in a more chaotic neutral sort of way. Then a light went off in my head. Chaotic neutral. Surprisingly, nobody has ever done a comprehensive moral alignment list for the Grand Theft Auto series, which I was extremely surprised by. So I decided that I'm gonna go game by game and discuss who I believe best encompasses all the different moral alignments as laid out in Dungeons & Dragons. One list per game, one character per entry, one person who best encompasses that spot on the list, one ring to rule them all. So let's do this. This is the Grand Theft Auto moral alignment chart. I'm gonna try to avoid duplicate entries for recurring characters, but that's my only condition. So let's start with GTA 3. Wait, GTA 3? Why aren't we starting with the original games? Well, to be honest, I've played enough of those games to know that they don't really have much personality at all, not enough recurring characters that got enough screen time, and the main characters are basically blank slates. So it would be nigh impossible to label anyone as anything, so we're skipping straight to GTA 3. Starring an unnamed character who was later revealed to be named Claude, who was betrayed by his girlfriend Catalina and now has to make his way up the criminal underworld to track her down and take her out. Now, the specific definitions of these moral alignments will probably change from game to game depending on the availability of characters. And we're already starting with a bit of a stretch because there are very few recurring characters in GTA 3 and even fewer ones who could be considered a lawful anything. So for a lawful good, I'm going with...
Yeah, I'm sure your new lapdog has everything covered. And isn't he big and strong?
Maria Leone is not the most virtuous character in the world, but as far as this game goes, she's practically Mother Teresa. She does illegal drugs and attends illegal parties, but at worst is complicit in a lot of terrible things happening, being married to a mafia don, and then later joining up with Asuka. She doesn't actively get involved with any illegal activities physically, on screen anyway, which makes her about as lawful as you can get in this game.
We have certain issues to clear up before we continue any form of relationship, business or otherwise.
Asuka is a high-ranking member of the Liberty City Yakuza, but also doesn't really do much on her own seemingly. A lot of the time she's giving Claude instructions and doesn't really get involved except as a retaliatory measure. Plus, she's also the person who gave Claude and Maria asylum when Maria accidentally got Salvatore to turn on Claude. So she's actually a really good person and is shown to be a principled person who's not above doing some pretty heinous things when the situation calls for it. So I slot her in as neutral good.
I'll need $100,000 to cover expenses. But you know with me, you get a lot of bang for your buck.
8-Ball is a pretty stand-up guy. He helps break Claude out of the prison escort they were both part of, hooks him up with a place to stay and with some mafia contacts so he can work his way up, boost his profile, and eventually take revenge on Catalina. And 8-Ball even helps blow up a shipping freighter where the Colombians are manufacturing spank, so as well as being a good person, he's loyal until the moment he disappears from the plot. But he's also an explosives expert who's complicit in causing a lot of destruction and probably a lot of innocent death as well. So even though he has good intentions and is good to you, he's also a force of chaos that is honestly pretty dangerous, putting him squarely in chaotic good.
You are going to have to ram that car and collect each little bit of evidence as it falls out.
Ray Machowski is a corrupt cop you do some work for, and his entire plot is essentially having Claude cover Ray's ass for his connections to the Yakuza and some other things he's being investigated for, so he's into some less than legal dealings and is the impetus for some pretty destructive and heinous tasks, but being a cop is also somewhat lawful by default, and despite being a bit of a scumbag at times, he does eventually reward you with a bulletproof Patriot car, which is beyond useful, so he balances out as relatively neutral as well.
Nothing drives down real estate prices like a good old-fashioned gang war, apart from an outbreak of plague, but that might be going too far in this case.
Donald Love has no allegiances in any direction except for his allegiance to money. So in that regard, he will do whatever it takes to make money. So he helps and hinders a lot of people in the process of making his fortune. Well, he doesn't. Rather, he employs Claude to do it. Donald himself is an enigmatic character who doesn't get involved in any of his own machinations and ultimately disappears without a trace without ever having to put himself in the line of fire. And that's why I consider him to be a true neutral. He does everything purely for his own benefit and doesn't lift a finger to do any of it himself. Meanwhile, Claude is chaotic neutral. He is neither good nor evil. His entire goal is to eventually find and take revenge on Catalina. Doesn't matter how he does it, he will literally do anything for anyone so long as it brings him closer to that goal. He'll work for the Leone family and then go out of his way to kill them the next moment without a second thought. He'll work for Kenji Kasan one moment and then hunt him down and kill him because Donald Love asked him to. He's chaos incarnate, and I can't call him good because clearly his ends don't justify the means, but his actions are completely self-motivated, so I wouldn't necessarily call him evil. Self-motivation is more of a neutral trait in my opinion, and he does do some good throughout the story. He is a bit of a psycho, because you have to be a bit of a psycho to put up with Catalina for a decade, but he's still a chaotic neutral.
Now I got girls all over town walking the street. Get them to the ball, they'll make a bundle.
Luigi Gotorelli, I think that's how that name is pronounced, is lawful in the sense that he's never been convicted. I'm stretching the definition, but that's because GTA 3 doesn't really have a character that truly embodies lawful evil. He runs Luigi's Sex Club 7, which is ostensibly a strip club, but with a name like that, how could you possibly not be convicted? Because his club is also a front for his prostitution ring, and yeah, I consider that a pretty evil thing to be running. But outwardly, he's a businessman running a legitimate business for the benefit of the Italian mafia, making him about as lawful as mafiosos get.
Now listen, you guys, you go inside while I talk to our new friend here. I see nothing but good things for you, my boy.
Salvatore Leone, a paranoid scumbag mafia don struggling to keep his mafia afloat against the ever-increasing opposition, so he employs Claude to do a lot of despicable things. If he was a man of his word and had Claude made after the destruction of the Colombian tanker, and then maybe helped Claude with the Catalina situation, he would be neutral at worst. But the fact is, aside from doing all these horrible things, he also turns on Claude without a second thought the moment that Maria floats the idea that she's cheating on Salvatore with Claude, without even considering everything that Claude has done. He's a paranoid evil SOB, and the only thing that keeps him from chaotic territory is the fact that I feel there was a method to his madness, despite it definitely being madness.
Well, I got news for you. Shooting you will be a pleasure, but dating you was only business. You are muy pequeñito, amigo.
I mean, of course Catalina is chaotic evil. She was the one who kicked off the plot by betraying Claude and leaving him for dead, and then working with the Colombian cartel to infest the whole city with spank for her own benefit. She kills indiscriminately, she kidnaps Maria, and oh, I forgot, she's also friggin' insane. Catalina is a real piece of work, and I would say she's evil for evil's sake, and that she comes across as a real psycho, so chaotic evil it is. Now on to Vice City, starring Tommy Vercetti, who has just been released from prison after surviving an assassination attempt at the hands of 11 people. Now he's been sent to Vice City by his gang to establish a foothold, but their first attempt at making money gets ambushed, and now Tommy is responsible for tracking down the perpetrators of the ambush, take them out, and take over the city. This one's also a bit complicated as far as which characters to put where, but that's mostly down to the fact that Vice City has a different progression compared to a lot of other games in the series, so that means you don't have as many recurring characters that appear throughout the story, but I think we've got a good list here, starting with...
You try living with it. Anyway, let me point out some of our more distinguished guests.
There's a shortage of lawful characters in Vice City, and I think the closest we have to lawful would be Mercedes Cortez. She's the daughter of Juan Cortez and largely does her own thing. Early on, they seemingly set up a potential romance with Tommy, but that goes nowhere. And she spends most of the rest of the game committing the sins of the flesh on anyone with a pulse, and becoming an adult actress in one of the side stories. Aside from it being implied that she's a hooker, she really doesn't commit any sort of crime from what I can see. And even then, I feel like selling sex should be legal, considering you can already film it and sell it, so as long as the hooker is doing it on their own volition, I say go nuts.
Don't you worry, Tommy. We'll be ready.
Ernest Kelly was very nearly lawful good, but unfortunately he has one strike against him. He admits to having participated in counterfeiting, and even encourages Tommy to turn the printworks into a counterfeiting operation as soon as Tony buys it, so I can't consider Ernest Kelly lawfully good, but he's definitely a good person. He's a sweet, kindly old man who you want nothing bad to happen to, and is about as non-threatening as non-threatening gets. Definitely a good man, even if he only shows up for a handful of missions.
You have my personal assurance that I'm gonna get you your money back, and the drugs, and I'm gonna mail you the dicks of those responsible.
Hey, I already know that.
Tommy Vercetti was a character I was having a really hard time placing, because in some ways I think he's kind of evil, but in the grand scope of morality, there are a lot of people who place lower than him. So I guess my rationale for this is that he's kind of psychotic and is prone to outbursts against his own men, and he's even more than willing to do a lot of pretty messed up things for other people, but he is loyal, and in fact, he feels genuinely betrayed when Lance turns on him. Then he's confrontational, but he can take his own licks, and he's self-motivated, but on a personal level doesn't usually step on anybody's toes unless they step on his first. So the sheer magnitude of his actions does relegate him to chaotic status, but his intentions keep him in the good category in comparison to a lot of other characters in the game, at least in my view.
I have been sitting in this chair all night with the lights off, drinking coffee. This is a disaster. We are so screwed, man.
Ken Rosenberg was a lawyer who genuinely had represented people in the past, both good and bad, and had ties to the Forelli crime family. He's a complete putz, but is also somewhat of a put-upon-everyman who gets dragged along throughout the entire charade by people actually committing these crimes. He's not necessarily good because he did voluntarily put himself in a position where he had ties to the Forelli crime family, and therefore was essentially a voluntary middleman between them and the seedy underbelly of Vice City, but he also doesn't actually go out of his way to do anything necessarily bad on his own volition. He's a neutral character to me, and he's lawful seeing as he's a lawyer. So put two and two together.
Tommy, you are like a pompous breeze that has freed me from the stench of corruption.
If you were to imagine every character in Grand Theft Auto Vice City as an artery leading to the heart, Juan Cortez is the heart. He's a rich drug lord based in South America who's the catalyst of introducing Tommy Vercetti to all the major figures within the city. And that's the most major part of his role. At all other times, we're helping him out so that he can help dig up who was responsible for ambushing the deal at the beginning of the game. And a lot of that is just protecting his interests. He rarely does anything to anyone without them first instigating it. So between his slightly reactionary nature and being a beacon through which the story advances without specifically being much of a key figure in it, I think Juan Cortez is a true neutral.
Now you can feed me all this lonely tough guy crap, but I know one day I'm gonna save your ass.
Lance Vance occupies both ends of the good and evil spectrum at different points of the game, so to me that makes him balance out to a neutral. For the first half of the game, he's attempting to avenge his brother who died during the deal in the game's prologue, but then also sells Tommy out to the Forelli crime family in the end, owing to frustrations with being seen as a secondary member of Tommy's enterprise. But Lance really didn't do much to help out. Either way, while balancing out to neutral, he also is constantly getting himself into trouble, as well as us into trouble due to his ineptitude and impulsiveness. Most notably, he decides to go after Diaz, the main man responsible for his brother's death, while Tommy is still trying to gather intel on the guy. So he's occupational chaos, ergo chaotic neutral.
Now nothing brings down real estate prices quicker than a good old-fashioned gang war. Except maybe a disaster like a biblical plague or something, but that may be going too far in this case.
Avery Carrington is a monster. He's Donald Love's mentor, and while he's building his empire by working the system to his advantage, he's also causing extreme collateral damage and extreme amounts of death, all for the purpose of the ever-opportunistic buck. He incites mass chaos, all for the purposes of gaining land and capital, and honestly is even worse than Donald Love would end up becoming. Because Donald does some pretty messed up things, but you're not blowing up buildings for him in GTA 3. The worst thing you do is start a gang war. And I guess you do that here as well as about a dozen other more horrible things at Avery's behest, while he remains squeaky clean. Definitely lawful evil.
You better not be screwing me, Tommy, because you know I'm not a man to be screwed with!
Wait.
Sonny Forelli is not necessarily the most evil person in the world, but he's definitely evil, no doubt. It starts out before the game, when Sonny, being jealous of Tommy's rising status, attempted to have him killed. However, Tommy ended up surviving the ambush and killed all 11 hitmen, resulting in Tommy being arrested and going to prison for 15 years. So that's a pretty major betrayal right there, but then it gets worse when Tommy establishes himself in Vice City and Sonny goes after his business interests because he feels he's owed a piece of the action for no other reason than he's the one who sent Tommy to Vice City in the first place. And then that leads to a more direct betrayal in the game's climax, so Sonny is an egotistical, entitled, murdering SOB. The only reason he's neutral evil instead of chaotic evil is because once again he's too calculated and deliberate. Too in control to be chaotic, so neutral evil it is.
Jack! Plastic crap! You doing this to me? Who do you think you are, you piece of plastic shit? Oh!
The reason why I consider Ricardo Diaz to be chaotic evil is that he's a frickin' maniac. Like, yeah, he's the drug baron who organized the sabotage to the deal at the beginning of the game, but he also causes a lot of really messed up things to happen, both on his own volition and in organizing other people to do it for him. He murders multiple people, he's ridiculously paranoid, he flies off the handles in a second, he has a Lance Vance tortured, I could go on. He is the embodiment of evil for the sake of being evil, and is the beacon of chaos, the likes of which you rarely see, even in this series. Now for GTA San Andreas, my favorite GTA game and one of my favorite games of all time. Starring Carl Johnson of the Grove Street families, who ran away to the East Coast for a couple of years and now that he's back wants to help his family gang regain their power and status. Meanwhile, having to contend with a corrupt cop who framed CJ for murder, and even with all that said, things aren't what they seem. Let's start out with...
Oh, what? A no-good, narrow-minded hypocrite gangbanger telling me what is right and what is wrong?
One of the things you'll start to notice is a pattern of women tangentially related to the crime families being ranked as a lawful good. In this case, it's Kendall Johnson. Well, she's tacitly involved with the gangs given that she's dating a gang member, but she never really involves herself with gang activity, and everything she does involve herself with usually revolves around being in a managerial role among the legal side of the Johnson empire. Property management, and the casino. And despite being tainted by growing up in this universe's version of Compton, she's about as morally righteous as you can get in this universe. So I think she counts as both lawful and good.
As Daidai of the Triad, it is my responsibility to see that disputes are settled without damaging important business.
Woozie Moo is a man of principle and respect who just so happens to be a high-ranking member of the Triads. Throughout the story, you get the impression that he's a stand-up guy who values friendship and loyalty, but he isn't above capping some people if the situation calls for it. And also, his enterprises stretch both into the legal and illegal. He's a man of layers and who I ultimately consider to be a good person. Not necessarily lawful, but still good.
One last thing. You do know that I'm black, right? And not Chinese.
Okay, so this one might be a bit controversial, but despite his many atrocities against his fellow man, particularly those of opposing gangs, I consider CJ, aka Carl Johnson, a good person at heart, if for no other reason than he has all the best intentions. He wants to help his family thrive after all the loss they've suffered, and generally speaking, he doesn't step on your toes unless you step on his first. He usually just gives back the energy he receives. Aside from the fact that as the player character he has the ability to commit mass murder on a whim, he's also infiltrated gangs to eventually take down every high-ranking member, committed heinous crimes to bolster his own interests, and has gone along with a lot of bad things which range from petty theft to international espionage, all for the sake of getting his own way. So while he has the best intentions, he's done a lot of very questionable things, so that's what makes him chaotic in my mind.
My mansion ain't big enough. Only got 19 bedrooms, you heard?
Truth be told, I think that Kendall and Mad Dog could be swapped and this list would still be valid. I guess Mad Dog isn't particularly good or bad, he's just a guy operating within a system. A famous musician within the world that this game takes place in. He's a reactionary character is what he is. Somebody who got screwed over by CJ and then later helped by CJ to make a comeback, so he doesn't do anything illegal, but he doesn't really do much to show his morality in one way or another. He just makes music to sustain his lifestyle, the end.
We paid them to lie to us. Is that what our founding fathers wanted? No more, friend. No more.
The Truth is such an odd character. He's a hippie dude who's probably been tripping on at least 16 different substances since the 60s, but he's also incredibly neutral in every way. He doesn't really involve himself with anything, and doesn't really have anything other than a weed farm. He works with everyone from Tenpenny to Kent Paul. He doesn't discriminate. But he also doesn't really do anything on his own, as he's a self-professed pacifist, so I think he's about as true neutral as you can get.
I work for a government agency. It is not important which one. I will try not to confuse you.
I was considering putting Mike Torino as lawful neutral because he's a government agent who's technically putting CJ to work for the benefit of the government, but he's also an agent of chaos, independently moving around pieces to the chessboard that is geopolitical standings as well as interagency conflicts. He's a chaotic force, but he does keep his word and his promises, and he's also a man of true values. So he's definitely not good, nor is he evil, so chaotic neutral it is.
Welcome home, Carl. Glad to be back. You haven't forgotten about us, have you, boy?
I mean, lawful evil? Officer Tenpenny is about as much of an embodiment of lawful evil as you can get. He's a corrupt cop using the law to get his own way, regardless of who he screws over in the meantime. He frames CJ for murder so he can blackmail CJ to do any job Tenpenny can't, he gets anybody who gets in his way killed or arrested, and does 100 other scummy things, all while remaining squeaky clean himself. Truly a detestable cop if there ever was one.
And that CPO, Mad Dog's manager, is putting on me real heavy, man. He cribbing my style for real.
I was considering putting Ryder on here for his inconsistency, but I realized that OG Loke really was the only character who could fit this description. Because while he's not physically involved in the gang life, he does aspire to it and wants to be a gangster rapper. And so has CJ kill and sabotage several people for the benefit of nobody else but Loke, which is pretty messed up when you think about it. He's a pretty garden variety psychotic, despite not being part of a gang. So yeah, I think he's pretty evil, but due to his self-centered ideology and his inability to do anything himself, he's pretty neutral in his evilness.
Same things make us laugh, make us cry. But right now, we gotta take care of our business.
Who else but Big Smoke was gonna qualify as chaotic evil? I mean, technically chaotic evil is evil for the sake of evil, but I think Big Smoke qualifies as chaotic evil because he essentially uprooted his own gang as well as the entire makeup of Los Santos, all for the sake of his own benefit when he became the drug lord of the city, making millions of dollars off the suffering of others. Off his own brothers, no less. Meanwhile, also being complicit in the death of Beverly Johnson, as well as all the horrible stuff that Officer Tenpenny does. Basically, Smoke's facade of evilness masks the evil that he truly is, who left nothing but destruction in his wake en route to making it big. Honestly, there's not enough characters in this game, and even fewer with actual personalities, so I think I'm just gonna skip this one. And now on to the PSP spin-off games, supplementary games that have a story to tell in their own right. Liberty City Stories stars Tony Cipriani, a member of the Leone family who makes his way back into the fold after going into hiding for a few years and has to make his way back up the gang and help his boss win the ever-prominent struggle for superiority with the other Liberty City gangs. Meanwhile, everyone and their mother is trying to sabotage the Leone family business. This one was a bit tough, given that it doesn't quite have the same level of characterization as some other games, so I did have to stretch a bit, but we have a roster starting with...
I'm not playing Salvatore's game. Thanks for the donation, kid. See you around.
Jane Hopper is a union leader for the ferry workers in Liberty City. She initiates a strike on account of the construction of the Callahan Bridge and the Porter Tunnel. both of which will likely put the ferry workers out of business, which is a pretty understandable cause. I mean, Salvatore claimed to have helped organize the strike, but that doesn't mean anything. The strikes are still lawful and understandable. Maybe they were going to strike regardless, and Jane took Salvatore's help to streamline the process and gave him empty promises. The wiki describes her as a corrupt union leader, but I don't get that impression. At worst, she's greedy. Salvatore wants to use the docks to smuggle drugs, and she takes their payment but doesn't follow through on her end of the bargain because she wants an even bigger payoff, and as a matter of fact, I don't think she ever even breaks the law on her own volition, and even refuses to back down to mafia pressure until they catch her off guard. Maybe I'm missing something, but I don't see her as corrupt or unlawful. In fact, she's probably one of the more lawful people in the series, and her intentions are theoretically for the benefit of her workers. So I think she's a lawful good. I will concede if I'm wrong, though.
The city is grateful to you?
Miles O'Donovan is the person who wins the mayorship of Liberty City after Joseph O'Toole is killed by Tony, and the whole reason that the Leone family don't want Miles O'Donovan to win was because he was theoretically completely on the level and was opposed to the Leone family interests. So Miles O'Donovan got caught in the gang wars of Liberty City through no fault of his own when he just wanted to be a good mayor. Unfortunately, he is coerced into doing work with the Leone family in the end, so his morals could be compromised, if only under duress. Apparently he was in the pockets of the Forelli family, but I don't even remember if that was ever established outside of characters just saying that he was. But either way, he never comes across as a bad guy, so I think he's a neutral good, if nothing else.
One of Salvatore's dogs is bringing me right over. Oh, he's a charmer. Maybe too thin, though.
Maria Leone is downgraded from lawful good to chaotic good in this case because while not much is necessarily different between this game and GTA 3, she proves herself to be much more of a nuisance. Particularly at one point when she's ODing and you're basically forced to drive her around town to find a substance called a Zap to neutralize the stuff in her system before she's beyond help. But she's also openly cheating on her husband, selling out the Leone family for money, robs stores, and so on. So despite being relatively on the level morality-wise, for this series at least, she causes a lot more trouble for you and the family. Chaotic good.
After you took that photo of Casa, he stopped paying his protection money. And what are you doing about it? Nothing.
Okay, admittedly, this one's a bit of a stretch, but that's mostly down to the availability of worthy characters in this game. Mrs. Cipriani is the mother of Tony, and while she doesn't necessarily stay squeaky clean, particularly as she hires some hitmen to try and take out Tony because she's dissatisfied with him, she never gets involved with the gang side of the game. Plus, she never actively goes out of her way to do anything illegal herself other than the aforementioned hitman situation. Plus, while she's antagonistic towards Tony, she does love him in her own way. So I would say she balances out as lawful neutral.
You're like a son to me. Better than my son. Better than any son. Your mother is a lucky woman.
Liberty City Stories is the only case where Salvatore is a protagonistic figure rather than an antagonistic figure, but as a result he comes across as the most reactionary he's ever come across as. He has his own goals, but in a lot of cases he seems like he's letting events happen to him while occasionally sticking Tony on whatever problem he may or may not have. In fact, he even pairs Tommy up with a random member of the gang in the beginning of the game because he wanted Tony to work his way back up. I don't know, something about Salvatore in this game just doesn't particularly come across in any direction. He comes across to me as a true neutral in this particular setting.
Mr. Leone, I thought we got history. I mean, I've done a lot for this family.
I mean, of course Tony Cipriani is chaotic neutral. He showcases himself capable of doing both good and evil and has a sense of loyalty. In fact, his friendship with Salvatore is kind of sweet, and overall he's a decent if stupidly intense person. He's also the guy on the ground level doing all these crazy and destructive things, killing and sometimes doing worse than that for the benefit of his gang. And for what it's worth, he's furthering the interests of himself as well as many other people who are part of the gang. But as a matter of perspective, that could be good or bad. So yes, he's the one causing all the chaos in the story mode, but I would neither consider him good nor bad by the logic of this game. Definitely more of a neutral than anything.
I have some more delicacies about to be served. The liberals would have a field day, of course, but how little they know of life's real pleasures.
I feel like Donald Love was neutral in GTA 3 because he was already established and didn't really have anything to add to his empire, but in Liberty City Stories he's still very much up and coming, and as a result he's much more on the ground with his atrocities. First of all, I'm not sure if this was ever established in GTA 3 other than having the phrase morgue party thrown around, but he's actively eating corpses in this game. He's also complicit, if not outright involved, in a lot of the fairly horrible things that happened during and after his campaign to become mayor. He's corrupt as hell, actively seeking to become mayor for the sake of the Leone family, and even has us destroy an entire section of the city so that he can redevelop it. And I'm glad he calmed down by his next appearance because holy crap. But he still mostly gains his power and influence by staying within the realms of legality as a land developer. So while evil, he's still fairly lawful.
Oh God, I feel like the day the FBI searched my hard drive. Oh, my heart's racing. You got any Valium?
You know, I was originally gonna put Joseph Daniel O'Toole in the lawful neutral category until I went through and reminded myself of what his particular role in the story is. Now, first of all, he's a character who's associated with the Sindaco family and even owns a bar named after the Sindaco family Dawn. But he's also a weasel, turning on his allies the moment he gets a better deal, runs a prostitution ring, went to jail for boinking a minor, and worse yet, is implied to be a kitty fiddler. I feel like there's too much weighted against him to be considered simply neutral. He's definitely evil, and definitely gets what he deserves.
So keep quei bastardi dei Leone tied down in Portland, and when my associates control this city, you'll be taken care of.
Massimo Torrini, or Massimo Torrini, is the antagonist and final boss of this game. And to be honest, is a little bit of a weak one because he shows up something like twice in the whole game, and given the plan he enacted, it would have been cool if he was more of a central figure. He's a ruthless Sicilian mafioso who has delusions of grandeur and wants to take over Liberty City. He enacts this plan by sparking several gang wars by promising certain parties various favors. Eventually, when shit rockets fan word, he decides to kidnap Miles O'Donovan, the mayor by that point, as a last-ditch effort to take over. So despite his lack of screen time, he is a pretty chaotic figure and is basically evil. Aside from all the horrible things he does in his short screen time, he's also described as having killed people with his bare hands in his younger days. So he's pretty ruthless and is a force of chaos. So chaotic evil. Moving on. Now we move on to the second of the handheld 6th-gen GTA games, Vice City Stories, starring Vic Vance. A good man who gets himself dishonorably discharged from the army by doing favors for his superior officer, and now he's forced into a life of crime to make ends meet for his family, and accidentally earns the ire of several powerful figures. Let's start with...
Didn't finish high school. Got a kid by a goddamn prick. Living on my sister's couch? No hope.
The story of Vice City Stories can be summarized by victims of circumstance doing what they can to survive, and no one is more of a victim of circumstance in this game than Louise Cassidy Williams, who's my pick for this game's lawful good. She's about as virtuous as anybody from these games can get. She doesn't really break the law to any serious degree. I mean, she does drugs, but this was the 80s, everyone was doing them. Otherwise, she was a loving mother with an abusive baby daddy, and doesn't get involved with the more nasty aspects of Victor's gang at any point. So she's a shoo-in for lawful good.
You know, my daddy came here from DR. We didn't have a lot of opportunities. You know, what else was I supposed to do?
Victor Vance is also a victim of circumstance, joining the army to support his family only for his superior officer to betray him and gets him dishonorably discharged, as I said. So he becomes a criminal largely out of necessity, which is why he's a neutral good, because while he does a lot of messed up things, he does them with the best intentions. Then he decides to get out of the business when the time is right. Well, until Vice City.
No blue. No white. I'll take all three. Hey, I'll call you back.
Lance Vance. What a prick. At this point in his life, I would say he's still good, but he's a chaotic good because out of the two brothers, he's the one more gung-ho and making it big as a drug baron, but he's also the one to constantly get him and his brother in trouble, and is a giant screw-up generally, and while he also has the best intentions, although more selfish than his brother, he's definitely more of a force of chaos that moves the plot along through his ineptitude.
Success and failure, man, woman, and me, I smash them together.
Rennie Wasselmeyer, aside from having a name that couldn't be more confusing if it were Russian, is described as a transgender avant-garde film director. Although the transgender thing is a bit up in the air because this person has transitioned and detransitioned multiple times canonically. Is that even possible? Rennie does do the drugs, which puts, I think, him into contact with a lot of the drug lords of Vice City. For his entire story, we're basically just protecting him from all the drug-based hot water he gets himself into, because he put Vic into contact with rival barons. Then Rennie detransitions back into a woman and escapes the city. This person doesn't really show any great level of morality in one way or the other, and mostly just exists to survive based on their own business dealings, and doesn't really actively try to screw anybody over for their own benefit. And generally, Rennie stays within the realms of the law other than doing illegal drugs. But once again, this was the 80s. So I think Rennie can be classified as lawful neutral.
Yeah, mismanagement. Or was that just Rennie's name for you? You should have got those false tits, mate, just like Rennie suggested.
Yes, Phil Collins, as in the real-life musician Phil Collins. I consider him to be the true neutral of this game because really, he's just in Vice City to perform and nothing else. It's his manager who screws everything up and gets him into trouble. So we have to protect him, but otherwise, Phil Collins shows up in the game, he performs, and moves on to the next city. The definition of a true neutral.
Well, I ain't a bank. I don't have it on me, but I'll take you to it.
Phil Cassidy is a trusted ally, but mostly does his own thing, selling guns and making moonshine, boomshine, which is a type of moonshine, so the distinction is meaningless. You do some work for him, save him a couple of times, he quits drinking, then takes up drinking again when his sister is killed, and ultimately his most relevant part of the story is ramming a truck into the front gates of an army reserve to create a distraction so Vic can go around and steal a helicopter. He's a guy who does his own thing, but is also kind of crazy and unpredictable. Plus, while he's a good friend, he's not above working with the bad guys, making him a distinct chaotic neutral.
Who wants trouble? Nobody. Everybody wants to relax. No trouble.
Sergeant Martinez, while being the main antagonist and most long-lasting antagonist, is definitely lawful. He's an army sergeant who has his fingers in the drug trade and essentially uses Vic as a fall guy shortly before deciding to try and kill him, as well as Phil. He's a total scumbag, but does manage to keep his nose clean by covering his tracks. It takes a lot of work to draw him out and take him out, but at the end of the day, he's still an army sergeant as corrupt as he may be.
I pay you to help me, not to argue. You hear?
Marty J. Williams is a complete and total bastard. He's the leader of what is colloquially known as the Trailer Park Mafia. He's a loan shark, a pimp, and more. In this series, that doesn't necessarily make you evil. At worst, it can make you an anti-hero. However, he is presented as though you're supposed to hate him, especially when he starts to get into the realms of being a domestic abuser to his wife, the aforementioned Louise. Even attempting to traffic her, which is when it all becomes too much to me and you have to kill Marty, much to my glee. So he's definitely evil, but he's too calculated to be chaotic. Also, am I the only one who hears Marty J. Williams and thinks Raymond K. Hessel from Fight Club? Just me? Okay.
You see, we're utilitarians. The greatest good for the greatest number. And there are two of us, but only one of you.
So the Mendez brothers, the main drug lords in Vice City at this point, aren't quite as out-and-out crazy as Ricardo Diaz, but they're still pretty nuts. You earn a debt from them, and after you pay it off, they assume that you'll give them your entire empire, which you refuse, and that leads to hours upon hours where they attempt to make your life a living hell, culminating with them killing Louise and almost killing Lance. So while they're not necessarily crazy, they're definitely evil in a very uncomplicated way. They also cause you a lot of problems and drive most of the game's conflict. So to me, the Mendez brothers classify as chaotic evil. And now we're moving into the GTA 4 quartet, by which I mean GTA 4 and its 3 spin-offs. Possibly the most dense period of storytelling in the entire series, but we start with the base game. GTA 4 starring Niko Bellic and his friends as Niko attempts to escape his traumatizing past that is determined to follow him wherever he goes, meanwhile surviving in the only way he knows how: crime. So to start placing these fools, none is more fitting than...
Talking, not having casual sex, Patrick. I pray after the amount of practice you've had, you'd know the difference.
Kate McCreary is the definition of lawful good. She's sweet and innocent, and despite being part of a literal crime family, is the only one who doesn't take part in the crime whatsoever. Well, except maybe the mother. Wishing to be a law-abiding citizen for the rest of her life, and depending on which path you take, that could be as little as like 2 weeks. I have no criticisms for her morality. As a character, she's maybe a touch stuck up and a touch preachy, but she's definitely the most morally virtuous out of everyone.
Why are you telling me this now? Do you always get sentimental after you kill people?
I was tempted to name Roman Bellic as a lawful good, but I realized he's not necessarily wholly lawfully good, as he does get himself involved with various gangs and has a tendency to illegally gamble all his money away, but while he is at times a wannabe womanizer, he is at heart a good person who wants to live out the American dream entirely legitimately, and does eventually commit to being a good husband to Mallory, and eventually a good father, assuming he makes it that far. He's a flawed person, but he has all the right intentions.
Yes, you do. I'm the one who survived.
I would say that Niko Bellic himself is a flawed character who has all the right intentions, except for the fact that he gets directly involved on a ground level with gangs. He's a man with a checkered past and enough mental trauma to make a psychiatrist hyperventilate, but he does have a good heart at the center of it all. Mostly falling into crime because he doesn't know how to live any other way. Survival and revenge are the core tenets of his personality, but he's also loyal to those who are loyal to him, meaning that he's willing to commit the most atrocious of atrocities, but is capable of doing a lot of good. So definitely good, but also very chaotic.
FIB? Do I look homosexual? Do you think I care about the size of your Johnson?
The ULP contact in GTA 4, who is at some point revealed to have the name Bernard, is an agent of the International Affairs Agency, and much like Torino in San Andreas, is a government agent who strong-arms us into working for them in exchange for amnesty as well as favors. The work we do for him is dirty at best, killing people that are associated allegedly with various terrorist organizations, as well as killing people who know too much. But he's a man of his word, not only being the canonical reason why Niko is able to keep his nose clean during much of the game, but also eventually delivers on his promise to find and deliver the man who Niko is looking for, Darko Brevic. So despite being far from good, Bernard is lawful, working for the benefit of the United States government, which is at least lawful in regards to the United States, and does things both good and bad in service of his tasks. So to me, he's definitely a lawful neutral on balance.
It's Bernie now! After I came here, I wanted a complete change, so I became Bernie Crane. I'm sorry about the fat thing. You're still kind of cute.
He is the gay one!
There are probably better examples of true neutral characters compared to Bernie Crane, aka Florian Kravitch, but I still chose him over the others. Mostly because despite being a genuinely good-natured character, his whole story is entirely self-motivated, with us helping him live normally against the world which is determined to take Bernie down. He's one of 3 survivors from Niko's platoon that was betrayed during the war in the Old Country, so he moved to Liberty City to be his true self. He's dating the deputy mayor, so when you're not protecting Bernie against rampant homophobes, you're helping him get rid of any evidence tying Bernie to the deputy mayor in order to stop the big man from having his image hurt. Otherwise than that, he basically stays out of the whole conflict in the main plot if he can help it. And to me, that makes him the definitive true neutral. On a side note, this was a surprisingly respectful portrayal of a gay character, especially for 2008. Niko is a completely non-judgmental friend, and Bernie is an upbeat friend who supports Niko and Roman no matter how determined the world is to fall apart around them. I think everyone needs a friend like Bernie.
VIP. For real. Classy, but also sexy.
Brucey Kibitz, I think that's how that name is pronounced, is definitely a force of chaos. Mostly because he's whacked out on enough steroids to drown a killer whale. If that makes any sense. He's a good, loyal friend to Roman and Nico, and is also completely nuts, operating a car modding business and setting you on a string of missions that exist purely for Brucey's own benefit. However, he's not evil and is definitely a good friend, so to me, his personality and overall place in the story says he's a chaotic neutral. Hence why Nico stops working for Brucey after a while, but also why Nico keeps Brucey in his life.
It's gonna ruin my life. It wasn't bad enough having a bunch of crooks for brothers. Now I've got him threatening to talk to a journalist.
Francis McCreary is a real piece of work. He's the most lawful of the McCreary family, but he's also the most awful of the McCreary family. Corrupt to the very core, a deputy police commissioner who essentially blackmails Nico into working for him. And all the work entails taking out people who pose a threat to Francis to uphold his reputation. Honestly, you're given the choice to kill either him or one of his brothers at one point, and I couldn't shoot Francis fast enough. Lawful evil, and to say he's lawful is only in the most technical of ways.
I looked out for you. You know, people want to whack you. I said no. Now I need you.
Jimmy Pegorino is the leader of the Pegorino crime family, the black sheep of the Liberty City crime families. Aside from being one of the most notorious gang members in the city, and therefore kind of evil by default, he also forces Nico to either work with the man who betrayed him earlier in the game, and if you choose not to, Pegorino attempts to kill Nico without a second thought. But if you take the deal, someone else decides to kill him. But to me, the idea that he's responsible either passively or directly for both major possible character deaths, and being a notorious mob boss that even in a game filled with mob bosses you're supposed to find a bit suspicious, that says to me that he's at least neutral evil. However, there is one character that is more evil than him.
But you messed up and left a lot of bad debt. You left a good friend of mine out of pocket. Big time.
Of course, it's Dmitry Raskolov. The dude is the main antagonist and pretty much responsible for all the conflict in the game as of like 20% of the way through. After doing a few jobs for Dmitry then betrays Nico seemingly at the behest of Ray Bulgarin, who Nico had previously worked for before the events of the game. From then on, Dmitry becomes a high-ranking member of the Russian mafia and essentially spends the rest of the game trying to kill Nico. But not before burning down Roman's apartment as well as his business. He's an evil, twisted son of a bitch and is really the only choice in my mind to take the chaotic evil distinction in this game. Moving on to a spin-off of GTA 4, GTA Chinatown Wars, starring Huang Li as he attempts to secure a family heirloom, find his father's killer, and track down a government mole who is sabotaging his uncle's gang from the inside before Huang himself is killed for suspicion of being the mole. So there's a shortage of characters in Chinatown Wars, so I kinda had to stretch credulity with this one quite a bit. In particular, I couldn't find any undisputed lawful good characters. Well, except for... Does anybody remember Marcy? Well, of course you don't, she's a random encounter. She's a lawful citizen until she is told she only has another month to live, so she decides to cut loose with the help of Huang. But her doctor miscalculated and she's actually in good health, so she goes back to being a law-abiding citizen and even decides to sue her doctor. So she's a character that got screwed over by a mistake, and other than when she thought she was going to die, follows the law pretty much to a T right up until she gets run over. Lol. Ling Shan is a short-lived character in GTA Chinatown Wars, and I do mean short-lived. She gets killed like 3 missions in. But up to that point, she's good, if sarcastic to Huang. She's an associate of Uncle Kenny who teaches you the ropes and helps out a bit before dying. That's all I've got. Lester LaRock, a character that certainly exists. He's an ex-con bike enthusiast who we help infiltrate the Angels of Death to see if the mole is working for them. And he's clearly not a bad guy. He's got a good heart, which makes sense. Given how many cheeseburgers and illegal substances he ingests, dude must have a heart of steel if it's still beating. Either way, he's a fine person, but he's constantly screwing the pooch and forcing Huang to pick up the slack. So despite being on our side and being a pretty decent person, his constant screw-ups and insistence on having us fix his mistakes makes him an unintentional force of chaos. Shan Yaoming is not a lawful character necessarily, but he's also generally cleaner than a lot of other characters in this game. He's eccentric and into street racing, getting Huang to sabotage other people, but generally his role in the story is to constantly get screwed over in some way by his own stupid actions. He's not a bad guy, but he's incredibly inept, enough that he doesn't really have a distinct morality, and he's more lawful than many other characters, so that's good enough for me. Huang Li is the main character of this game and is arguably the most boring protagonist in the history of the series. Getting ambushed and left for dead as soon as he got to the city, his goal is to now track down and find his father's killer as well as the person who stole the sword that was meant as a gift to the Triad leader. He spends the whole game being snarky and sarcastic, but ultimately going along with whatever anybody wants him to do, good, bad, or indifferent. Plus, he doesn't really have much of a personality in his own right, and to me that makes him a true neutral. How do you pronounce the name Hsin?
Shin.
Shin? Okay, fine by me. Shin is a notorious and paranoid Triad leader, but also doesn't really do anything that could be described as evil in this game, at least by his own hands. He instead has other people do the deeds for him, usually to test loyalty. He was the one who had Uncle Kenny steal the sword. Otherwise than that, he is the one whose entire operation is under threat by a mole, so he spends the majority of the game trying to smoke out the mole, but ends up being seriously injured and arrested thanks to the true mole. So he's definitely a chaotic force, but doesn't do enough to be distinctly good or evil. Wade Heston is a detective and is a real piece of work who essentially blackmails Huang into working for him, not even for any righteous reasons. It's so Wade can have one big bust to hopefully get internal affairs off his ass because he's a corrupt, drugged-up divorcee. He's not quite as evil as some of the other character archetypes with this distinction, but for his past actions, his abuse of the legal system, and his treatment of Huang, I think he qualifies as lawful evil. Rudy Diavanzo is a character who uses Huang's own desperation to find the mole against him, claiming to Huang that the mole is a character named Jimmy Capra. However, he turns out to be completely innocent. Rudy was just stringing Huang along to deal with his own issues, which actually sabotages the Triad's relationship with the Mafia, so Huang ends up killing Rudy. He knowingly and proudly has a naive and desperate man kill innocent people for him. Truly one of the most detestable characters in the entire game. Uncle Kenny was really the only character that could ever have the distinction of being chaotic evil in Chinatown Wars. He killed his own brother, nearly had his nephew killed, and strung everyone along this giant story that had all his opposition be slaughtered, all to become the new Triad boss. He let nothing stand in his way, not family, not friends, not reality, not honor. He is truly a detestable SOB, and a crazy one at that. So chaotic evil. Moving on to the first major expansion pack of GTA 4, The Lost and the Damned, one of two expansion packs that tell the same story from different perspectives, this time surrounding a motorcycle gang, The Lost, in their various machinations, starring Johnny Klebitz. And we begin with...
It wasn't enough we had to be drug dealers, we also had to be outlaws, to be maniacs, to be psychos, and to be greedy. You know.
Considering The Lost and the Damned is based around a motorcycle gang, it's hard to find anybody who's truly lawful, and the closest I could come up with would be Angus Martin. Mostly because he's not capable of doing anything illegal. He is the group's mechanic and is a paraplegic as he was injured sometime before the events of the game, so he mostly sits off on the sidelines and is a victim of everyone else's stupidity. So I'd say he's about as lawful as it gets. As for good, well, he's on the side of the protagonist, so I guess that's pretty good. Talk about slim pickings.
We head over to the clubhouse, close to where I happen to know they got themselves set up, and we show them that we're not quite the
that they think we are.
Jim Fitzgerald is just a stand-up guy. Jim is the treasurer of the Lost, and he follows our boy Johnny to the ends of the earth. He is fiercely loyal, and as a matter of fact, his loyalty is what ultimately does him in, because he stands by Johnny even while Johnny is attempting to steal money off of mobsters. So in the events of GTA 4, he is killed by Nico. And in any case, he's not the most lawful character in the world, but in my view, he stands as one of the most morally righteous characters in the Lost.
I'm sorry. I know I ain't much, but I'm all yours. You do know that, baby, don't you?
Ashley Butler is an unfortunate case, as she's the main character, Johnny's on-again, off-again girlfriend, but is also a junkie and the resident bike of the entire Lost MC. She racks up debts with high-ranking mobsters, and she gets herself into a lot of trouble, so Johnny always has to bail her out. So she's a force of chaos, but she also has a good heart, and she's only the slave to her own addictions, so I rank her as chaotic good.
Not quite sure I meet the dress code, but I think I like the smoking policy.
Did you know that this character, Thomas Stubbs, was the source of a lot of controversy back when this game came out because he has a scene of full frontal nudity? I feel bad for the guy who had to model his schlong. But anyways, Thomas Stubbs plays a similar role to Bernard in GTA 4. An employee of the government, in this case he's a congressman, who essentially blackmails you into working for him, but with that said, the things he gets you to do are no less morally grey than the things you were already doing, and he actually has a few moments where he pays it forward. Such as when he warns Johnny and the gang that their former associate Billy, who we'll be talking about in a minute, is set to testify against Johnny. So as far as the United States law is concerned, he is lawful and is a bit of a douche, but he also doesn't really point his guns in any one particular direction far enough to be considered good or evil, so I'd say he's neutral.
You got a couple of f***ing deadbeats outside!
So why is Jason Michaels the true neutral of this story? Well, because he basically does nothing and then dies off screen in an early game mission from the main GTA 4 game. So he's about as nothing burger as characters get.
I can't believe I'm hearing this. After everything we did for you. Paid your rehab. Paid your lawyer's fees. Paid your rent.
And now on to the main character of this story, Johnny Klebitz. And naturally, like most of the protagonists on this list, he's a force of chaos, as he has to be in order to get the plot moving, but he has a couple of things working for him and against him. He's loyal to his gang to an absolute fault, and genuinely has a good heart, such as how he wants to help Ashley despite everything, but he's also complicit in doing a lot of really horrible things, and even actively goes out of his way to do these things in some cases. So as usual, his morality balances out to being about neutral, which begets his chaotic neutral status.
Oh, what do we have here? Looks to me like a couple of mopes with some stolen bikes.
You know, I was umming and erring over who I thought the lawful evil in this game was, because, quite frankly, I couldn't think of anyone because there really aren't many lawful characters to begin with in this game. Then I was going over my footage and I remembered, oh right, there were a couple of crooked cops who tried to blackmail Johnny and Jim. Specifically 2 cops named Ed McCornish and Jimmy Matthews. And I thought, hey, they only show up for 2 missions, but as far as this list is concerned, they're practically a shoo-in for lawful evil. They tried to blackmail you, and you killed them in response, so all's well that ends well.
End this little squabble and get back to work.
As for Ray Bacino, he was a fairly easy choice because he's a high-ranking member of the Pegorino family, and so he's definitely as far from lawful as you can get, but at the same time, he's also an ally-turned-villain for justifiable reasons. When a diamond exchange goes awry, Johnny tries to take the money and run, and that was Ray's money. So he's fairly justified, but is also very gung-ho in torturing Jim, and essentially demolishes the entire MC with his own hit squad. I think that's what puts him over the edge as being evil, is the fact that he took it out on the entire motorcycle gang and not just Johnny. He could have easily justified his actions if he didn't go completely overboard. So I'd say he qualifies as neutral evil.
Okay, so I'm a little pissed off and I've been a bit of a prick lately. Come on, man.
Billy Gray is the leader of this chapter of the Lost MC and is a complete psycho. Everything he does involves grievous acts of violence, very little of which is actually retaliatory. Billy is almost always the instigator. He instigates a full-scale massacre against the Angels of Death, despite Johnny having previously set up a truce with them in Billy's absence. Billy even blamed the death of Jason Michaels at the hands of Niko Bellic on the Angels of Death to justify the massacre when they had already been told that the AOD had nothing to do with it. Later, in a fit of paranoia, he tries to have Johnny killed, and when that plan backfires and Billy gets arrested, Billy claims that Johnny betrayed him despite it being the other way around. Billy then tries to pin everything on Johnny and fellow Lost member Angus to get himself sent to witness protection instead of rotting in prison. Dude was unhinged, psychotic, needlessly violent, self-centered, and single-handedly destroyed the entire gang through his actions. Truly the poster child for chaotic evil in this game. And now on to the second and final expansion pack for GTA 4, The Ballad of Gay Tony, the game starring gay club owner Tony Prince and his right-hand man, Luis Lopez.
Luis, hey, hijo, ¿quieres un cafecito?
Sí, un ching.
Un ching.
Adriana Lopez is the mother of the main character, who's this kindly old woman who's admittedly a bit cold towards Luis, but in a mother giving her son a hard time sort of way. So she's a kind motherly archetype, which is about as morally good as you can get, and she's also pretty much entirely lawful. Her involvement in the plot largely revolves around her borrowing too much money from loan sharks to pay her bills, and her son has to bail her out. But otherwise, she's a prime example of a lawful good, in my opinion.
You see this city? I own it. Everything. Seriously.
Really?
No.
Yusef Amir might be low-key one of the most likable characters in the history of GTA. He's an eccentric Middle Eastern land developer and does get you to do some pretty stupid things, but what do you get for the man who has everything? A subway car, apparently. But he's always there for you, is a man of his word, and is super nice. Like, he's so nice, it honestly kinda pisses me off when Luis acts cold towards him. He even takes it upon himself to pilot a military helicopter and take out your pursuers during the final mission to help you take out the main antagonist. The dude is a total bro. Unfortunately, he does drugs, employs hookers, and steals millions of dollars worth of stuff, so he's not exactly lawful, but he's as morally good as GTA characters get.
Hey, he said he saw you last night. Man, you was holding court with that Chloe Parker until 4 a.m.?
I think Luis Lopez is a good person, always looking out for his friends and his family. He's an ex-con trying to lead a more lawful life, but is constantly dragged into the fray by the people around him. So while his heart is in the right place, he's constantly finding himself doing ridiculous, destructive acts at the behest of other people so that eventually he might be able to get back to some level of normalcy. So I place him as chaotic good, but once again, you can't get the plot going without being a little bit chaotic.
What is wrong with you, man? You are ruining my buzz.
Gracie Encelotti is a mob daughter who doesn't have a squeaky clean record, as she canonically has been to jail for cocaine possession, but it's also noted that she stays out of the family business. So for the lack of lawful characters in this game, she basically gets this position by default, for only going to jail for cocaine possession. And I classify her as neutral because despite being a supporting character, she doesn't really do much in either direction. She's kind of reactionary, as she spends most of her time on screen either partying or as a plot device MacGuffin being kidnapped.
Tony, I have what they tell you, perfect clarity, beautiful clarity, well cut and a load of carrots. What do you expect?
The Cook is a character that briefly shows up in the intro of GTA 4, but is more notable for his role in The Ballad of Gay Tony because he's the one who steals the diamonds that sets off an entire subplot that lasts half the game and stretches into all 3 stories of Grand Theft Auto 4. However, he's a true neutral because his entire role is to show up with the diamonds and then later die so that Ray Bulgarin can mail his severed head to Tony before attempting to kill Tony. So he's a neutral force that has no personality or agency all his own, and merely exists as a plot device. True neutral.
I've done a deal with the wrong devil, man. I'm such an idiot.
Tony Prince, aka Gay Tony, is what I would consider to be a chaotic neutral because I wouldn't necessarily say he's either good or evil, but he's definitely a force of chaos in that he's the one who keeps messing things up and getting him and Luis into trouble. And every time he successfully gets one shovelful of dirt out of his grave, he inadvertently piles on 2 more shovelfuls. There would have been no game had he stayed on the straight and narrow and didn't get into drugs, didn't try these get-rich-quick schemes, and didn't try to get involved with the mob. But that doesn't make him any less chaotic.
What about me? You guys can't just leave me here.
Yeah, good point.
Why do I think that Evan Moss is evil in any way? Well, because I think he's an incredibly bad influence on Tony. Evan is Tony's boyfriend, and he's an enabler. He is complicit in a lot of the very self-destructive habits that Tony has, and even contributes, plus he's also partially responsible for Tony being in the spot he's in, as Evan is the one that's spending all his money, or at least that's how Tony puts it. Either way, I think Evan is a genuinely bad person, a toxic partner, and him dying was one of the better things that could have happened to Tony.
Look at you. You're lumpy. Oh, you look awful, like a big pale mess.
Maury Kibitz isn't the most evil character out there, but he fits the description enough for me. He plays the same role as Brucey in the main GTA 4 story, but that's because Maury is Brucey's abusive older brother, through which we see a much more vulnerable side of Brucey. While Brucey ends up becoming a good friend, Maury comes across to me as somebody who just abuses everybody who he sees as less than him and never even makes an attempt at being friendly. So he's all the illegal activities of Brucey with none of the charm. Quite frankly, it was really satisfying to see Brucey break his nose. So yeah, he's not the most evil character by the usual definition, but he's still a pretty reprehensible person.
Shut up, bitch. Take your pills. A friend of mine is here.
Ray Bulgarin, whose last name I kept reading as Bulgarian, is the principal antagonist of the Ballad of Gay Tony, which will come as no surprise to anybody if you've played the main game of GTA 4 and saw that Ray was a previous associate of Nico, who Dmitry Rascalov sold Nico out to. Now, a lot of his plot involvement revolves around diamonds that were stolen from him and have been exchanging hands all over Liberty City. Upon learning that Luis and Tony have the diamonds, he does everything in his power to try and kill them, even sending the severed head of the cook who originally stole the diamonds from Ray and who sold them to our two leads. So he's already pretty evil and causes quite a bit of chaos and destruction, but to top it all off, he's also canonically a human trafficker. I don't think I need to justify his placement on this list beyond that. I think there is no greater evil in this world than human trafficking. GTA 5 was probably the easiest list to compile because there are so many different characters in GTA 5 with so many different roles in the story. GTA 5 is a massive game, and that massive cast of characters starts with...
If your problems are my problems, then I guess that means that my problems are sort of your problems.
Dave Norton is definitely the most lawfully good person in this game, and he's mostly just caught between several different factions pushing and pulling him in various directions. He was the one who got Michael a new life in exchange for information, and Dave is pulled into the fire once Michael is back in the game. Then he spends the rest of the game trying to help Michael as well as his superior, Steve Haynes, all while trying to make sure he doesn't get his own ass pulled into the fire. Anything bad he does completely reluctantly, and once it's all said and done, he's happy to let Michael go about his life and forget about anything that happened. So basically, he's just a good dude, trying to do his job, but he's caught in a tough spot. Definitely lawfully good as far as this game goes.
What did you tell him about me, about Martin Madrazo?
Despite being a minor antagonist at one point in the story, Martin Madrazo, I feel, is completely on the level morality-wise, at least as far as these games go, because any sort of antagonism he has is retaliatory. Though he does verbally berate his wife, and that's certainly not cool. Yeah, he does go after Michael at one point, but because Michael caused millions of dollars worth of damage to his mistress's house. And once his debt is repaid, Martin doesn't cause him any more grief. Otherwise, he's completely reasonable and is even willing to let bygones be bygones after Trevor brutally beats him and kidnaps his wife. If anything, he deserves his pound of flesh. You could say him letting it go partially comes from intimidation, but for a guy who owns his own cartel, I feel like he's almost too nice. But since he does own his own cartel, that's what keeps him from being lawfully good.
Around the block with Chop, you need to walk with your fat ass.
Lamar is easily the best character in the game in my opinion. He has a constant chip on his shoulder in comparing himself to Franklin, where even something as petty as Employee of the Month is something he fights for. So he's constantly trying to live up to Franklin, and as a result, he's constantly getting himself and Franklin into trouble. Very much like Lance Vance in Vice City stories. He's got a good heart, but he's headstrong and naive enough that he has to constantly get bailed out of trouble. So he's a chaotic force, but a good dude. So do the math.
Neutral ground. Dr. Friedlander's office.
Amanda DeSanta is Michael's wife, and while Michael does give her a lot of grief, she doesn't exactly make it easy for him. She's not a faithful wife and can be a total bitch at times. Not doing anything to dissuade Michael from being mad, but she's at least a good mother to her own children, and when the time comes is willing to set aside any problems in her marriage and make things work. So she roughly balances out as neutral, if only because her good is balanced out with the bad. And she doesn't have any major moral stake in the story. Plus, she is the one out of the two of them to not break the law, so once again, do the math.
I just came by to see if there's something I can help you with. I see you doing well for yourself.
Okay, sorry to anybody who's a fan of Franklin, but I'm putting him here as true neutral because I think he's just an incredibly boring character. He has very little personality or agency of his own. He mostly spends the entire game blindly going along with everyone else for whatever they want to do, up to and including multi-million-dollar heists. He's a straight man of the worst variety with very little discernible personality of his own. A true nothing burger character-wise. Also, once again, I'm using the term straight man in the storytelling sense, not the sexuality sense. Some people who don't understand the distinction have gotten weirdly mad about that in the past.
Oh man, I'm mortgaged up to my eyeballs. Look, I only know one way to make money. I'm gonna have to give an old friend a call.
Michael DeSanta is a man with severe issues, but I'd also say he has his heart in the right place. He's a criminal who wanted to get away from the criminal lifestyle to live a normal life with his wife and kids. So his intentions are fairly pure, but he also has severe anger issues, goes back to his criminal life without much hesitation, and even alienated his own family due to his anger and contentious personality. His intentions may be good, but sometimes we're not defined by our intentions, we're defined by our actions. And he has enough both good and bad for me to consider him morally neutral, but at the same time his anger does cause him to be a force of chaos a lot of the time, so he's a chaotic neutral.
Why don't you start with me, genius?
You got it, pal.
Steve Haynes is a high-ranking member of the FIB, so once again his status as a government agent makes him technically an inherently lawful character. With that said, he follows the usual formula of lawful evil characters in this series and essentially blackmails you into working for him, and you carry out many jobs throughout the game in order to sabotage a rival agency, the IAA, in order to secure more government funding for the FIB. So basically, Steve is manipulating the entire system for his own gain, while holding you at the proverbial gunpoint, with a smile on his face. He is a slime ball, and the fact that he has the balls to ask you to kill one of your own associates in the end is the cherry on top. Even though Trevor kinda deserved it.
Because they have things nobody else has, because they can afford it, because frankly, I'm rich enough to do whatever the I want, and you're poor enough not to ask me any goddamn stupid questions.
Devin Weston is a billionaire doing billionaire things. He's yet another complete and total slimeball. He has practically every negative attribute a person can have and does anything and everything to piss you off. Backing out of agreed payments, attempting to sabotage Michael's life's work, and when Devin's secretary is killed while trying to commit insurance fraud for both of them, long story, he blames Michael and attempts to kill his family. Then later, he tries to get Michael killed. Basically, he's a rich scumbag who has no loyalty and will do anything to increase his capital. A complete and utter monster. But he's also a little too calculated to be chaotic, so instead, that distinction goes to...
Yeah, what are you gonna stand here and argue while your daughter becomes a national laughingstock? Huh? You're worse than I thought.
This is going to be a controversial pick for sure, but I think nobody epitomizes chaotic evil in GTA 5 quite the same way that Trevor Phillips does. I think that's the only case where I can say that about a GTA protagonist, but mostly because there are multiple protagonists here. Trevor has a few positive personality traits going for him, such as the fact that he's loyal to an absolute fault and does have a soft spot for certain people, but he's also a monster. He's a raving lunatic who kills indiscriminately, is into all sorts of illegal activities, and constantly gets himself and the people he cares about into trouble. And unlike Tommy Vercetti, for example, he doesn't have the likability or the context to justify it. So he's just an unlikable monster. Alright, well that was longer than expected. Going through this, you start to notice specific patterns, like how a lot of protagonists in this series can't really be described as good because they're self-motivated and aren't above doing horrible things, but they're also not necessarily bad because they usually at least have the right intentions. I guess it's hard to write a truly virtuous character in a series like this. You're always shackled by the fact that a player can go on a rampage whenever they feel like it. But this is my list. Tell me what you think about it in the comments section. Did I get any selection wrong? Are there any details I missed that would have recontextualized my picks? Let me know, and don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification icon so you're always up to date on what I'm doing. And if you want to support me in a more direct fashion, you can pledge to my Patreon for unique perks and rewards, such as early access, Discord benefits, and exclusive content, along with these fine folks right here. And an extra special thank you to Billy Knott, Brooklyn, Dick Kickham, Gaw004, My Name is Tank, Knob Varley, Patchworks, Raaf, TyTrovy, and WeirdWebbster for going above and beyond. Elsewise than that, I've been the King of Snark Style right here on Tactical Bacon Productions, and I will see you next time. Stay crispy, my friends.